Hello and welcome to our webinar, How can rural areas benefit from the green transition? Local energy, land use and value creation, ? Welcome to today's program on a very timely topic. We have more than 100 sign-ups for this. And my name is Anna Karlsdottir. I'm a senior research fellow at Nordregio, and I will be your moderator. The aim of this webinar is to discuss what role do different rural areas in the Nordic countries play in green renewable energy transition. What is specifically rural? In other words, what are the rural perspectives and implications of this transition? What challenges are unsolved or need to be solved in Nordic renewable energy transition to secure local benefit to rural areas? One thing the green transition has taught us is that we need to jump out of our silos and act across sectors. We have taken that as an ideal, and therefore we are co-hosting this event with our good colleagues at Nordic Energy Research. To spur a discussion on a Nordic level, me and Lise, hi Lise, will shortly introduce our approach to the question of rural challenges and benefits from green renewable energy transition perspective. Then it's time for our invited speakers, Irene Kummonen, Ásdís Hlökk Theódórsdóttir, Johanna Liljenfeldt, and Stefan Damsgaard to give us insight into these processes or their studies from 4 different Nordic countries. And dear audience, we also want to hear from you. We want to hear from you, so join the Zoom chat and post your questions for the panel discussion later on. Presentations and recording will be sent in few days. Actually the discussion paper that I'm going to give you a short introduction on now will also be released by end of this month. So now I will start with some opening remarks. And so we have been commissioned by a Nordic Thematic group that is called Nordic Thematic Group of Green and Inclusive Rural Regional Development to focus on just green transition in rural areas from the local benefits perspective from value creation. So the question is, how do rural areas benefit from the green transition? And of course, dear folks, there is a myriad of issues to be explored there. And this word cloud only gives some idea what we touch upon in our discussion paper. And that what we've been working on is a combination of a policy overview and discussion paper where the purpose has been to grasp the current green transition policies relating to mainly energy transition and land use in 5 Nordic countries and to discover possible rural perspectives. Now, we are linking this to academic discourse where we are also exploring concepts, mainly concepts of just transition and value creation. And what is also important to tell you is that we are actually delimiting us. We are keeping as out of scope of this study renewable energy consumption or market-driven supply, fossil fuel use, and nuclear energy. So we are not focusing on these issues of energy transition. Now, trying to identify key challenges with Nordic renewable energy transition, you will soon stumble upon technological contingency, political contention, social energy justice, and recognition questions. Decarbonizing energy systems while ensuring sustainable, affordable, and stable energy supply is a major societal challenge that implies a large-scale socio-economic transition and has an impact on the whole of society, including institutions, regulations, business models, and user behaviors. This is no simple way. Related socio-economic and environmental goals may compete or conflict with each other. A phenomenon known as the energy trilemma, the triangle that you see here, which describes the imbalance between the competing aims of economics, politics, and the environment in energy transitions. Issues such as energy finance and affordability, energy security and capacity questions, and the environmental harm resulting from energy installments and mitigating climate change are all there. So we have a vision that renewable energy development must be technologically feasible, economically viable, environmentally sound, and socially acceptable to be successfully and fully adopted by society to bring the expected change towards green transition. However, it's a very complex field, and just to relate this to our upcoming discussion paper is we have tried to explore relevant concepts and issues, the concept of justice related to rural areas, both distributional and restorative, and the concept of value, both instrumental and intrinsic when it comes to space, land, and nature. And then spatial planning, land use planning as a tool is also a rather important aspect in our discussion. Another is if local ownership or co-ownership is the way forward instead of compensations. There are significant potentials in creating synergies by linking the energy transition with sustainable rural planning in order to tackle ongoing social, environmental, and economic challenges. However, this requires that both rural communities and municipalities participate in the transition and work to ensure just outcomes and acceptance of transition measures. And we know that complex situations may arise. So we are not here intending to go to any bottom line in exploring what are the best ways to reach reconciliation among competing interests and secure local benefits for rural areas. We are here to spur a discussion on a Nordic level. And so I say, here we go. Thank you very much. And I throw the ball to my colleague, Lise Nilsson, who is a senior advisor at Nordic Energy Research. How are you exploring this from your perspective, Lise?
Well, we at Nordic Energy Research, we offer funding for research projects, but more basically, we also spend a lot of time figuring out what people need and what kind of funding is needed. And so today is not just telling or something about Nordic Energy Research or about land use, but also to listen to the audience and then find out if there is something that is represented in research, so that it can be, because securing the energy source is half of producing the renewable energy. And biomass is challenged. We all know that biomass is a challenge as a renewable energy source, because it's not necessarily the right way to use the land. There is a strong competition. Nordic Energy Research has a clear task. We build on the strategy from the ministries to help make the Nordic region the most sustainable and integrated energy region in the world. And this is based on a strong cooperation at many levels. Also, the Nordic countries' energy sources are so different. So they actually complement each other strongly, which is a good thing to cooperate then. Because we don't have hydropower in Denmark, we have wind, we have space in the ocean, we have internet connections with the continent for power transfer. So in every country has different resources. Some countries have strong resources for carbon capture uses and storage. And then we could go on. Those are some of the tasks we perform, funding research. One is maritime transport and energy research programs. Those are two main programs. Maritime transportation in the Nordics was identified as an area that was under critical in each country by itself in national funding, but together it could reach critical mass and could be performed. And this way the research could actually intensify and reach new and eventually commercial results. Because together there is a Nordic value creation, which is important when we fund something. There has to be a stronger benefit of doing things together than from doing it separately. Then it will become more interested. And one way to do that is to reach a critical mass of interest, companies, research groups, market volume, or public interest. That's a Nordic value that we can reach together. Another Nordic value can be indirect light for PV, because PV research in the rest of the world focuses on direct sunlight, but in our region, indirect light is a lot of the light we have. And there is technologies that benefit stronger, like thin film, but it's under research currently in Horizon programs in Europe, for instance. So maybe we should put more effort, because this is a resource we have. Things like that we identify. We perform tenders for companies or consultancies to do energy scenarios or reports on different subjects. We offer secretarial support for ongoing critical issues like the electricity market group, and we cooperate with others like today, but also to perform events like at the COP27, upcoming COP in Egypt, to have a presence and put forward some critical topics. Basically, all the energy working areas are anything that uses energy, because it used to be 10, 15 years ago, you would never discuss green transportation because it was hard to solve. Maybe a little bit about electric cars and charging structures, but it wasn't considered something that was easy to solve. So therefore, it was not in focus. Further back, it was not considered interesting or easy to solve to involve consumer energy efficiency, energy savings, and it's still not considered relevant in some of the Nordic countries because it's considered hard to engage the consumers. But we know that as long as people see the point of doing energy savings, they definitely get engaged. So this is a topic that could grow more. And a new topic is energy communities, consumer ownership, smart grids. This is the vision that we work for: a green Nordic region, a competitive Nordic region, and a socially sustainable Nordic region. The first two are kind of obvious, but the third one means that we can't find solutions that leave people behind, that somebody can't afford or somebody cannot be accessed to. There has to be a solution not just for house owners, but also for people who rent there, where they live, or small and large companies, or small and large areas, towns. How far away are we from a main city? You still have to be included. So the socially sustainable part is really important to keep in mind for all solutions. You can find a lot more information here, nordicenergy.org. There's programs, there's all reports, funding, different headlines. Go have a look and sign up for the newsletter, because then you will be informed when there is something that might have your interest. We have a current call with a deadline at the end of October. Nordic hydrogen valleys as energy hubs by 2030 and 40, meaning that we have to see solutions in the projects that are funded fast, because now we are busy. We can't have 2050 as the only goal. This is slightly relevant for today's topic, because energy hubs and hydrogen is not something that just exists in one factory somewhere or pipeline. It exists in the landscape. Somebody will be the neighbor of such facilities. Pipelines will run in the landscape. There has to be infrastructure, and everybody will be somehow not forced but asked to understand how to live with this new type of infrastructure that we haven't really seen. So you have to be informed. You have to accept or not accept the placement, the local, how to use the space for all of this new technology. Is that a chat question? I don't know if there is a chat question, but maybe you can ask me if there is one, Anna. So
competition for use of spaces.
Yes.
What we see.
Yes. There's a high level. This is just the intro to the next 3 slides. But basically, space, everybody thinks that there's a lot of space, so we can just go ahead and plan for it, but definitely no. It's highly complex how to use the space in the open land. There's a very high number of relevant interest groups, and everybody has to have a say. But there's also a lot of good solutions that already exist. Sometimes we just have to realize that not everybody knows, or you cannot take for granted that people knows what the challenges are. And clearly planning is the way forward, and with a lot of involvement of people. So these are some of the areas that compete for space: energy production, food production, climate adaptation, which is part of what we see in the picture. I will explain the picture in a second. You can write in the chat if you know what you're looking at. I would be curious if somebody knows what they're looking at right now. The picture is very telling, and it's a very precise picture. Biodiversity is a big challenge because it's also a CO2 sink, but it's also in nature. We cannot afford to lose much more biodiversity as it is right now, because the solutions is in the plants and in the green. Wetlands with different purposes, different types of is it clean drinking water wetland? Is it a drainage wetland? Is it biodiversity wetland? There are so many options. Protecting drinking water usually below ground, but sometimes it's surface water. And the infrastructure wants to run in that area too. Plus all the fun of rules and zoning and ownership. So did anybody offer a suggestion in the chat what we're looking at in the picture? No? This is the Danish-German border. The German side is to the left side, and the west side is the Danish side. And why does it look like that? We had some heavy rains. This is, I think it's 2019. Most of the wind power is on the German side too. And you may wonder, why is it so wet just along that very specific line where the border physically runs? The thing is that the German side, they drain differently. They drain to be efficient and to get rid of the water, to protect the land and the infrastructure. And the Danish side has a different focus, which says you have to not drain efficiently because that's bad for biodiversity in the draining zone. But when you have a lot of water from above in heavy rains, which are stronger than before, not planned for that strong rain, it took a week to drain. And the German side was drained in 4 hours.
We have already a suggestion from Otto Eliasson that this is recovery of wetlands and windmills.
Yeah, no, it's actually not good. It's not supposed to be that wet, but the thing is, the German side, the left side here, is only 26 square kilometers of drainage wetland into a canal. But on the right-hand side, the Danish side is 400 square kilometers of drainage upland to a not straight canal. So it runs much slower. And the idea is to protect the biodiversity and protect the waterway that drains, how it works. You also see that on the German side, they had no problem issuing permits for wind power, but on the Danish side, it's strongly limited because of different zoning and regulation. And the wet side is Tønder municipality. Last year, there was a vote for local political office, and there was an overwhelming support for a new set of political focus on local ownership for renewable energy technologies in that municipality. And they made a new instrument for how to offer ownership. If you want to have a wind power station here, which is obviously a good place because the Germans have it, you have to offer local ownership to be allowed. You can't just come and offer something and can I buy this land and get a permission? No, you have to let the locals co-sponsor and the municipality have co-ownership. And actually it's a really, it could point forward to how to engage ownership to gain local acceptance. There's a lot to learn. All of these relevant interest groups, citizens, well, not all citizens are happy, but they are remarkably much more happy if they are offered around 20% ownership. This is a figure that we have seen the last 10 years or more in different local rural areas where there is a lot of space for wind power. If the owner of the planned wind farm offers 20% ownership to the local people in the region, then all the no goes away. People are then more accepting. Local energy communities is a new thing that is offered in the RED II directive from the Commission, and it's implemented in the EU countries. That people have the right to join together in local energy communities to balance their own energy needs and to join the market with some surplus energy or to trade via an aggregator. And this is a new thing that will spring up, and we have to make sure that they are not just there, but that they're also smart, that they interact properly with the grid, with proper solutions, that they can operate in a smart grid setting if there is, that they can balance themselves. For instance, they not just be stupid, but be smart. It's not a question of just of raw power. It's also a question of limiting your own demand to the times whether you have a production. Yes. It can be so much more than raw power. In the South German rural areas, already some years ago, a few years ago, the owners of farms in South Germany have 30% of their income from providing electricity from biomass or wind power or solar power. 30% of your farming income is quite a lot of farming energy farms in more than what, pig farms, chicken farms, energy farms. Those could be part of local energy communities too. We see a lot of conflict between the people in the city who just want power cheap and the people in the rural areas who said, yes, but you can't exploit us like that. We really don't like that feeling. So there has to be a consensus investment. Investors have to accept this, otherwise they will never be allowed locally, because the local politicians cannot allow it. If they will not, there's an issue. You have to respect the locals. But the locals also then have to know something about what are the choices. You can't just say yes or no. You know, everybody knows NIMBY, not in my backyard. Nobody wants banana, which means build absolutely nothing anywhere near anybody. That's not a good solution either. For the hydrogen future, probably you need to plan infrastructure close to technological highways, pipelines, existing physical highways, train transport corridors, big harbor hubs where a lot of products and goods will be shipped and transferred to be more efficient. Also because the municipalities in those areas are better equipped to handle permission for heavy industry. You cannot place a hydrogen fuel production site in a rural area and hope to have local understanding.
And Lisa, I
Yes?
would like you to wrap up here.
Yes.
Do you have a couple of words?
Yeah, the final one here.
Yes.
There's a lot of information to be got. The last line, inspiration from the Danish wind power development effort. What made it district heating, wind power, and biogas happen was that from government level there was rules that you have to allow the production into the grid. You have to permit the production units to be built, and you have to allow for research and funding. You can't just have one of them, you have to have all three to make it happen. So to create the market pull, you have to create the physical ability to deliver, and you have to support it by research. And then the fourth now is to make sure that people know, so they are informed and know how to say yes or no. Thank you.
And with these words, I thank you, Lisa, and bring the light to our next speaker, Irene Kummonen. Hello, Irene. Irene is a Finnish researcher based at Jyväskylä University. She has been and is involved in writings and studies of how different rural areas face green transition, both the forestry industry as well as the farmers in remote regions of Finland. Irene, how are Finnish rural regions experiencing the green transition, the forest industry and the farmers?
Okay, maybe I will
Floor is yours.
share my screen.
Yes, please do.
Okay, that was the wrong one. Sorry about that.
Nice horse.
No, there's a problem. No. I tried to share the screen, but it took the wrong
slide.
Are you seeing now?
No, we're seeing a very beautiful picture of, yes, there was something.
Okay. Let's hope it works now.
And it works now.
Yes, perfect. Okay, thank you for the invitation. And I will talk about the role of rural in sustainability transition, whether we're witnessing shifting baselines or continued peripheralization. And I'm a doctoral researcher, hopefully defending my thesis early next year I come from the University of Jyväskylä School of Business and Economics, and my research topics relate to food systems, the resilience, sustainability transition, and more generally to the power position of rural primary producers in this context of sustainability transition. And what I will be talking to you about today is the implications of the transition from a fossil fueled world to one based on circular bioeconomy, and how this kind of systemic social metabolic transformation has kind of all the potential to shake the current power structures and relations, including the center-periphery relations. But then we're gonna take a look at the empirical evidence and how the transition processes have actually taken shape in these rural areas through the 3 cases. I hope we have time to have a look at them, but let's see how it goes. First of all, if we think about the transition from a world fueled by fossil fuels to a world fueled by a circular bioeconomy, whether this means a shift from a centralized model to a decentralized model. Essentially, the fossil economy is very centralized in its essence. The fossil fuels are extracted from point sources from which they are then shipped all over the world. Whereas if you compare that with the idea of giving up fossil resources altogether and then moving on to circular economy, bioeconomy, renewable energies, which are everywhere, basically. So their spatial connection is much more stronger than that of the fossil economy. But at the same time, the orientation towards growth is different, because if you're dependent on renewable biomasses, for example, those cannot grow indefinitely, instead of if you compare that with extraction of fossil fuels, where there's basically no gap in how much you can do that. And then if we move on to kind of look at how the actors that are taking part in these transition processes, how they are experiencing that. We published a paper in First Policy and Economics this year with together with Maija Halonen from University of Eastern Finland and Annukka Näyhä from University of Jyväskylä, and we looked at the kind of the transition tensions incurred by this move from a fossil fuel world to circular bioeconomy. And we started by looking at the policy documents that concern forest and bioeconomy, both at the level of EU and the national Finnish level. And we found that they are built on the belief that it is possible to achieve economic growth, ecological integrity, and social justice all at the same time, as we named the discourse as "you can have it all." But in practice, we observe that this transition towards bioeconomy is loaded with tensions concerning these 3 dimensions. Thus, we added this reservation by "you can have it all if you close your eyes." And then we contrasted this discourse with the interpretation of the regional development actors that are involved in the developing the forest-based sector, and kind of saw how their views relate to the discourse that we identified in the policy documents. And we found kind of 3 storylines from that data. First one is that you can have it all. It's possible, there's no problems in that. The second one was that you can have it all basically is perhaps possible, but it depends on many ifs. And the third one is that you can have it all runs into conflict. And then if we have a closer look at them, the first storyline is built on the idea of utilizing wood-based side streams and renewable energy, in essence replacing the fossil materials with wood and forest-based materials, and innovation plays a very central role there, as well as industrial parks and so forth. And this kind of storyline also prioritizes economy over other dimensions, which is probably why they saw no problems in the, or saw no tensions in that. The second one was basically a yes, but type of storyline. And in this storyline, they emphasize the difficulties that are related to closing down of old facilities in forest peripheries due to industrial renewal. And they also highlighted the problems related to the lack of entrepreneurs and companies who are the agents that need to realize the transition potential. And then we had this kind of "this is not working" storyline, where the development actors saw that the funding instruments basically favor large-scale projects and not local or small-scale niche type of projects. And then they also highlighted the problems with non-regional ownership and top-down policies. And as a whole, they saw that there's a skewed division of economic benefits, and the power relations are unbalanced, which result in the money and power fleeing from those peripheral regions when the super-regional actors are dictating the rules of the game. My second empirical evidence comes from the context of agri-food systems, where we looked at the resilience of farms in Eastern Finland and also contrasted those findings with the concept of just transition. We had 4 types of farms there, which this typology is built on the concept of resilience. So we had persistent, adaptive, and transformable farms, and then the non-resilient farm group. They were all quite different, as you can imagine. And perhaps what is important here is that over half of the farms are either persistent or non-resilient. And what is kind of, okay, the persistent farms are trying to kind of hang on there, but they're not improving things, not in terms of economy and not in terms of ecology either. And the non-resilient farms aim at, well, quitting farming altogether, so they have no successors, for example. So they either are going to afforest their fields or then lease or sell. And then those farmers who are kind of development oriented, the adaptive and transformative farms, they're different. So the continuous improvement and growth strategy is prevalent in the adaptive group, whereas the transformable farms are those who are trying to seek new pathways. And now that we have the strong storyline or a strong discourse of a dietary transition present, it's especially problematic from the perspective of the adaptive farms who have kind of been playing by the rules of the game, trying to enlarge their farming business in order to, stay profitable. And they have at the same time also improved their performance, not only in terms of the finances, but also in terms of the environment. And I think it is these types of farms that are in a way most vulnerable if the changes in the operational environment are drastic. So I would argue that we need policies, we need to build policies that are suitable for different kinds of farms, that we offer different pathways for farms to pursue, instead of just telling them that we don't want you to do this anymore. And I think I still have 5 minutes or so.
Yes, you have some few minutes left, yes.
Okay. Then I have this third example that related to the role of rural in the sustainability transition. We had 10 cases which have rural relevance. They related to the energy sector, food and agriculture, and forests. And in that example, we ask our informants to separate between probable future pathways and preferable future pathways in terms of rural livelihoods. And if we then have a look at how these cases or manifestations of the circular bioeconomy are located in the map, where we have a decentralized or centralized structure and a non-local or local ownership, we can see that all our cases go to the side of non-local ownership, and most of them towards kind of centralized structure. So this is the probable pathway for them if the current trends are kind of in action. But then we ask how they should position, how these trends should position if rural livelihoods are taken into account. And then the picture looks quite different. So basically, most of the manifestations shift place. So they move towards local ownership and more decentralized structure. And I think the take from this exercise was to show that just by strengthening some cases or some manifestations that are rurally relevant is not enough to kind of foster rural livelihoods, but we also need to ask how these things actually take place, who owns things, and how things are organized, basically. So as a conclusion, I would say that the sustainability transition does entail the possibility for a fundamental regime shift and to shake the power structure of the contemporary society, but it also risks the strengthening of the current center-periphery relations and this kind of strengthening of this green colonialism idea. And this is just an assumption, but I am asking whether the paradigm of green growth actually is reinforcing the current power positions, and whether we could find a new bond between the orientation towards sufficiency and the rural areas. And then my last point is that the actors in rural areas should be ready to take the responsibility and lead for and in the transition processes. And in that case, we should think about ownership and agency and bottom-up reorganization. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene. And from here, we will go to Iceland to hear from Ásdíslög Theodorsdóttir. She has, in her role as director for the National Planning Agency in Iceland until recently, where she switched to become researcher at University of Iceland, she's got a good insight into the planning approach for energy transition in Iceland. And please, Ásdís, tell us more about how to plan for the transition.
Yeah, well, hi, and
Hi.
I'm not sure I will tell you about that, but I will share some thoughts and information on planning for energy. Yeah, I'll start to share my screen and try to get the right one up here. So hello everyone, and thank you for the invitation to take part in this discussion. I am going to say a few words as I was asked to by the organizers of this webinar about rural areas and green transition, specifically in the context of planning and policy making on land use and energy in the case of Iceland. Let's see, I switch my slides. Here we go. So I was going to use my minutes here to go quickly through and give an overview of the key instruments for planning and policy making on land use and energy in Iceland, and share some thoughts about maybe more challenges than opportunities for rural areas in Iceland and in this context. But to start with, I think it's good to get a little background information as a sort of point of departure, if you like. I think it's important to keep in mind when we look at the Icelandic case that we have the unusual situation that the vast majority of Icelandic homes and businesses enjoy geothermal central heating, and also electricity comes almost solely already from hydropower and geothermal power. This of course makes our situation in many respects unusual or even unique. So for the domestic market, this means that the challenge ahead has therefore not solely, but primarily and mostly to do with energy transition in transport on land, air, and sea. It's also, I think, of relevance to keep in mind that our small domestic market is structured in a way that around 80% of the electricity produced in Iceland is used or consumed by heavy industry, such as aluminium smelters and data centers. So it's only 20% that's used by the general population and other industries. Why am I drawing your attention to this? I think this can be of importance for our system, as we can see that a relatively small change in the development of heavy industry can weigh a lot when it comes to forecasting what the need is for further energy provision to secure full energy transition from fossil fuels. There is also another thing that is, I think, of importance to draw attention to when you talk about planning for energy transition in Iceland. And that is that we have in our small country with our population of less than 400,000 people, we have many local authorities, many municipalities. We have 64 municipalities, which means that many of them have a relatively low population. We have nearly 30 that have less than 1,000 inhabitants, and thereof there are 16 with less than 500 inhabitants and 4 with only under 100 inhabitants. And this alone can be and is a challenge when it comes to planning and decision making, and can of course raise questions about democratic or political legitimacy about land use decisions on, for example, power plants and versus conservation of pristine natural areas. Also, as a sort of a background point, I think it's also important to keep in mind that it has not necessarily been made that clear by the Icelandic government and by the Icelandic society at large how we see Iceland's energy future. By that I mean that there are very different scenarios to look at Iceland becoming a major exporter of energy, whether that is via electricity via cable to the UK or Europe, or if it is by exporting other forms of energy like hydrogen or whatever that form would be. That is a very different scenario from the scenario of primarily thinking about fulfilling domestic needs for carbon neutrality and energy transition. And this makes it, at this point in time, a bit unclear about what the urgency is for more energy production and what the scale of that need is. And that does not necessarily help to build consensus amongst the population on where to go. Then coming to the sort of key pillars of the planning systems, and try to get a quick overview of the key planning instruments that we have to work with when planning on land use and energy in rural areas and in the country at large. This picture gives a quick overview of the key instruments. We have a two-tier government system with the national level and local government, so we don't have any regional level. On the national level, the key instruments in this respect are within the planning system. The spatial planning system is the national planning policy or national planning strategy. And then, of course, there are different sectoral plans and programs that affect decision-making on land use locally. The regional development program, the energy plan, the transport program, etc., etc. And they all feed into plan making at the local level. Sorry, regional planning is voluntary, apart from the capital region, where a regional plan needs to be in place. But all municipalities need to have a municipal plan in place, and a municipal plan is a land use zoning plan that covers the whole municipality. And then we have site plans for smaller areas, and then of course all these lead into building and development permits. It's important to have in mind when we look at this picture that the plan and policy making at the national level is generally with a binding impact on lower tier plans. So in some way or another, plan making at the local level done by municipalities has to take into account and follow what has been put down in these plans and policies on the national level. It's also important to have in mind that in the Icelandic planning system, local authorities have, though, certain sort of room to maneuver there, so they can in some instances explain why certain national policies should not apply in their setting, and they can also in some instances postpone the implementation of certain national policies. So, and this means that realizing something that is put on the agenda in national plans and programs can be a lengthy process, because there is no way around municipal plan making. That always has to follow when something has been put on the agenda in a national planning or policy document. And then if you look at the same picture, just concentrating on the environment for decision-making on energy, there we have one key instrument, which is called Rammaáætlun in Icelandic. And I name there the National Plan on Energy Utilization and Nature Conservation. And this is a plan or program that actually lists up proposals for power plants, and is binding for local authority plan making for all power plants that are 10 megawatts or larger. And this is binding, as I say, for lower tier plans, and local authorities are to implement this national plan into their municipal plans within 4 years from the approval, and this is actually approved by the Parliament. But they have the possibility to postpone decisions for 10 years. So again, there you can see how the system itself allows for quite lengthy procedures and processes if people have not been able to build a consensus on that particular land use decision. Then coming to some sort of a selection of some concerns and challenges that came to my mind when I was preparing for this webinar. Not necessarily covering everything, but some thoughts to share with the audience here today. One, of course, that is of major importance is that Iceland has vast, pristine natural areas and landscape that have different level of protection, both by law, set by national policies and by international obligations. And this is important because these areas tend to be often the setting where the opportunities for new power plants are, whether they are hydro, geothermal, or even wind. And this, of course, as previous speakers have, of course, raised and noted, land is a limited resource, and planning is about finding out about different competing interests that often want to make use of the same plot of land. And this makes all decision-making on new power plants politically sensitive and difficult. And it's also of concern here are lengthy planning and decision-making processes, especially for energy projects. And that has both to do with the instrument itself, the National Energy Plan, and it has also to do with this relationship between the National Energy Plan and local plan making that I mentioned earlier. And if we just look at the National Energy Plan, the first energy plan was approved by Parliament in 2013. Since then, immediately after that, a new planning process was initiated for the next generation of a national energy plan. That was not approved by Parliament until this year, 2022, which means that the process since the process was initiated has spanned over 9 years, and then we also have to keep in mind that then the local authorities have the possibility of postponing individual decisions that they have to implement into their municipal plans. So this is a rigid system and can be quite lengthy. And in the Icelandic planning and system, there are no ways to bypass this, and that makes Iceland unusual when we compare it to the other Nordic countries, where I believe in all the other Nordic planning systems and in other planning systems that we compare us to, there are always some sort of opportunities for central government to bypass or call in decisions or somehow take over decision making that involves interests of national scale. But we don't have that sort of planning instruments in our planning system. What I wanted to mention here thirdly is the question of local benefits of energy production. And of course, previous speakers have also mentioned this. This, in our experience, this tends to get somewhat unclear. What benefits stem from energy projects locally in rural areas? The business plan generally is to sell the energy for distribution onto the national grid. Power plants, especially hydro, tend to create few permanent jobs and no or few permanent jobs locally. And therefore, it is in most or many cases primarily a question of direct benefits for those directly involved in the power project and the owners of the land or the project itself, plus, of course, tax revenues for the local authority. And as I have mentioned already, we are dealing with a bit of an unclear message from the politicians about where we are heading, about the scale and nature of power generation we need for green transition and for reaching our goals of carbon neutrality. And finally, as I mentioned already, in many cases, we also have a weak local government level due to the small size of many rural municipalities. And often, obviously, then with few, if any, specialist staff in planning and decision making, and this of this type. So my final point here in slide is really about sort of if we look at what we can do apart from, or maybe rather as well as, energy production when we are looking at green transition in rural areas in Iceland. There are, of course, ample opportunities for rural areas that have to do with the green transition, which can strengthen and support rural communities in various ways. Some of these have been mentioned already in previous talks, but the sort of obvious ones in the Icelandic context is protection and reclamation of wetlands for binding and storing greenhouse gases, afforestation for the same benefits. Then it's carbon capture from air and industry, which is maybe a bit more of a future thoughts today, maybe not practical today, but maybe on the horizon at an industrial scale before we know. And of course, nature conservation and preservation of biodiversity, local food production, and sustainable tourism. So all these are something that are it's too long to get into that here in this talk, but all these aspects are in some way supported by national policy documents, and of course can be competing about land both in between these and with energy projects. But have maybe sort of, in many respects, more obvious benefits for rural societies in general. So I thought I was going to leave it there, Anna.
This is very interesting perspective, and landscape and planning are important issues, and I think also the time factor that you mentioned is quite crucial here. In realizing a transition, and of course the vision and political direction. We will now see a short trailer of an aspect that is often forgotten in relation to rural development and energy transition. It's the Indigenous perspective. So let's have a look.
One important perspective on the rural implications of the green energy transition in the Nordic countries is the perspective of indigenous people's rights. This was manifested in Norway in 2021, when the Supreme Court decided that a wind power park extension at Fosen Peninsula in Trøndelag conflicted with indigenous people's rights to graze reindeers on the land, even if authorities had given concession rights to the wind power park in 2016. The reindeer herding interests and land use needs collided with the renewable energy transition in the sparsely populated coastal part of the region. The Supreme Court decision confirmed Norway's commitment to Article 27 of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Article 27 of the UN Declaration was ratified by Norway in 1976 and protects cultural heritage and natural resources as a basis for cultural practice for indigenous people. The court decision makes Norway a front-runner country that could set an example for other Nordic countries, and shows that Sami rights have to be part of Norwegian lawyers' knowledge bases and part of law education.
And thank you to Mathias Brynildsen Reiner, who read this up for us. He's here from Norland Research Institute, working with us for the moment being. And it puts into perspective also a competing land use stakeholder in reindeer herding that is not only applicable to the Norwegian setting, but definitely also to the Swedish and Finnish setting. Johanna Liljenfeldt is with us. Hi, Johanna.
Hello.
And if I introduce you briefly, Johanna is a senior lecturer at Uppsala University, the Gotland section, and she's expert in energy transition. She leads a big Swedish project that is abbreviated ELO on local ownership of wind power. And tell us, Johanna, which local benefits are there in local ownership?
Oh, that's a nice transition. Well, we'll see if we get the whole way there. Let's see if I can share this first. Right. So now I'm sharing the document here. All right, I want to start also with thanking the organizers for inviting me for this very interesting discussion. It's been very interesting to listen to what's been said so far. I'm sure there will be more good insights. So as you already mentioned, Anna, my name is Johanna Liljenfeldt and I work at Uppsala University in Sweden. And I'm a senior lecturer in energy transition. So I focus on spatial planning issues, decision-making processes, and how we work with including locals in energy transition processes in different ways. I worked with wind power specifically before, and now I'm working more generally with energy transition, not necessarily focusing on rural issues, but always it seems I've been in a rural context. So hopefully I have some insights there. Yes, so today I'm going to talk about a project, as you said, that we have. Is called Local Ownership and Transition Towards Sustainable Energy Systems. So we're currently working on that with my colleagues at Nordregio. And I'll present the project first, and then I'll talk about some early findings from a literature review that we've done that I think might contribute to the discussion here today. Let's see if I find the button to change here. Yes, so the project is funded by the Swedish Energy Agency, and it's been running for about a year and will continue running until 2024. And the background here is that the European Commission has been focusing in on local ownership, on citizen or community ownership as an important factor for success for the EU's energy transition. And there's a lot of ideas about what local ownership how that can be beneficial for facilitating an energy transition, both in society and then in academia. So some examples include that there's an idea that through local ownership, we can improve the legitimacy and democracy of the transition processes. We can also improve the local socioeconomic benefits of these processes by including people. Empowerment, increasing local knowledge in general about energy questions are also things that show up. And of course, also by including people, we can access a lot more capital and investment for funding of the energy transition than just relying on governments or big companies and so on. However, there are, of course, also potential pitfalls here, and it's not necessarily so that these benefits are produced. So what we want to do in this project is that we want to investigate kind of the concept and idea of local ownership and how that can be organized in a way that creates a positive contribution to the energy transition, as well as how then we can avoid potential pitfalls or burdens or barriers for local ownership in different ways. So the project then, it's structured so that we gather information in the project, knowledge through literature reviews and then through case studies, but also through what we call knowledge exchange networks, where we aim to invite people from the case studies to take part in discussions about local ownership in energy transition processes. The results we hope to be able then to, or we will, present as digital stories from these cases on our website, which you saw in the previous slides, but then also produce practitioner guides and policy briefs based on these discussions and so on how we can produce or facilitate positive local ownership in energy transition processes. And then, of course, scientific articles as well, if that's possible, which it probably will be. So currently then we're working on establishing the case studies. So that's not really finalized yet. So I'm not going to name the different studies that we're looking into or cases we're looking into, but we're trying to cover a broad set of energy projects. So wind, solar, biogas, but also then energy efficiency or energy retrofitting projects, so on. We also try to cover different types of local ownership models. So for instance, ownership through housing societies or bostadsrättsförening in Swedish, or ownership through cooperation between different local firms and individuals, farmers, and so on. We also want to include different municipal initiatives, which is very important, especially in a Swedish setting where we have a lot of energy projects that are tied to the municipal facilities and initiatives. But then looking at how that ties into engaging local citizens and companies in different ways. And of course, we also want to look at community projects, which has been stated as very important in the European setting. And of course, we have that traditionally where we have a lot of development work being done in rural areas, specifically when it comes to communities, that they're in charge of that, and that where energy is just one of the projects that is being focused on in these settings. So we're trying to capture really everything in between the individual private level and local authorities and the cooperations that can take place in between these different levels, still on the local level. And then we're also trying to capture geographical width with north-south perspectives and rural-urban perspectives as such. And yes, this is then focused on a Swedish setting specifically. So we have a Danish case that we're including as well, but mostly it's a Swedish setting in this study. So hopefully we get some insights into understanding local ownership here. So this is what we're currently working on, but I'm going to now talk about what we have been working on before this. So our literature review, basically. And this is something that I'm doing together with Elin Sletmo and Louise Ormstrup Westergård at Nordregio. And so I'm not going to go through the whole review, but I'm going to focus in on how the concept of the local has been understood in relation to local ownership in research literature. And hopefully that can be a good contribution to the discussion today. All right, so looking at how the local has been understood then, to start with, I can say that most often it's not defined in any way. So it's just talked about as this generic term, the local or local ownership, without any further explanation of what is meant there. Where it is defined, it's often defined as a negative to something, so what it is not. So the local ownership is not geographically dispersed collective, it's not distant ownership. It is local consumption as opposed to energy that is being produced and sent out to the electricity grid for consumption somewhere else. So this kind of geographical understanding of what the local is. We also have other kind of what it is not definitions that are more maybe, let's say, qualitative in nature. So citizen ownership is an alternative to the traditional energy companies. So referring to, for instance, Vattenfall or Fortum, these kind of big established energy companies. So citizen ownership is something alternative to that. And then we have this other example here. So local ownership then is fundamentally viewed as something different from non-local ownership, where non-local firms is seen as something that is embedded in more national or international production networks and structures, not really contributing to a local environment in that sense. Whereas local ownership then is seen as something that is integrated into a local community and kind of related to these local and regional trade organizations. So something that kind of there's this belief that a local firm will inherently contribute to the well-being of the local community and the sustainability of that local community. However, what we also see in the literature there is a critique of this as too simplistic understandings of what local ownership could be. So if we're looking at, for instance, local firms, it's not necessarily so that they invest their money in the local community. They might not actually contribute that much to the local economy as such. And vice versa, of course, that non-local companies can still contribute to a local economy where they have an energy project, for instance. We can also see that there are plenty of examples of negative outcomes of locally owned energy projects, where we get, for instance, rifts in communities between different groups when we have different ideas about what infrastructure we should be building. I think wind power is a very classic example here, for instance. We also have examples of different individuals or groups being excluded from these local projects, for instance, based on gender or age or socioeconomic status, or as we just saw the movie about Indigenous people, and there's definitely a case to be made here also that there are exclusions and different ideas here of how to do things. So the assumption then that the local scale is kind of inherently good and therefore advantageous, often referred to as the local trap, isn't necessarily true. So positive outcomes are not always produced just because a process or project is local in that sense. So what this highlights is we shouldn't really blindly look at the specific scale of ownership and think that good things will come out of that, but instead maybe it can be more productive to ask what kind of qualities we're trying to access by focusing on communities or the local levels, and then kind of interrogate how do these qualities come about, and how do they connect to different geographies or different scales? How can we work with that? So this is then a model looking at motivations driving people to engage in community renewable energy projects. So reasons why, what they're trying to achieve by connecting to these projects. So we have a lot of different drivers here connected to political, environmental, social, economic, technological reasons of different kinds. And what is interesting when we start looking at this is that a lot of these things that we're trying to achieve are not necessarily connected to specifically locally owned projects. So we can get these things even though we have distant ownership. So for instance, a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions can be produced with any type of ownership structure. A development of a renewable energy industry, the same thing goes for that. Stakeholder income, we can create that for people, whatever ownership structure we have in place. However, there are a few aspects here that are clearly local in focus in that sense. So for instance, creating energy projects that also have local environmental benefits, that we have that connection. Creating local jobs and community incomes from a project, that we kind of tie that to the project in itself. Creating community building through developing an energy project, or increasing support by including people in local areas in the siting of a specific energy infrastructure. All of these kind of added values demand some kind of closeness to the project itself. So this is then when we start to get some kind of understanding of the specific characteristics of the local and how that differentiates from other type of ownership models in that sense. So what we try to do then is to put, to summarize, to list up different qualities that are inherently local in relation to local ownership. And this is what we have so far. And again, this is early findings, but balancing and steering positive and negative effects of energy projects in one place. So having that kind of geographical overlap of positive and negative effects and being able to steer that. Having control over one's own living environment, living situation. So being able to decide over resources that should be used or what infrastructure that we want to have in place. And then also place development, so engaging with energy projects as a way of developing the place that you're living in, and adding positive value to that. So that when we add this up, we start to get a definition of a more qualitative way, let's say, of what local ownership is. And so this is what we're kind of have as a draft version in the project at the moment. An energy project or process where both the project and the ownership are clearly bound to a specific place. So both the project and the ownership in a specific place. And the owners of the projects will themselves experience both the positive and negative direct effects of the project and have possibilities to steer these effects through their ownership. So not just waiting for the effects of the energy transition, whether they're positive or negative, but basically taking control of the direction of the energy transition in that place. I think it is also interesting when you look at the actual ownership, what we're owning when we're looking at what is said in the literature. So we have this, that people own energy facilities, people own the different benefits and risks of a project, but they also own the transition process and the vision for the energy transition itself. So this is, I think, where we find the local and something to add. That was what I had to say. So thank you.
Thank you for these wise words, Johanna. I would like Stefan Damsgaard. Hello, Stefan. To join us. Yes, here you are. Stefan has a lot of input into this discussion. I'm sure he's chair for the Joint Council of Rural Areas in Denmark. And from from literature that we have explored, it seems like Denmark has prioritized the rural perspective maybe more than many other Nordic countries, especially in mobilizing locals to become transformative agents. But there are on the horizon some issues that make this picture a bit more complicated. Isn't that right, Stefan?
That's correct.
Can we learn from you?
I don't know. I hope I can give a few remarks and a few good ideas on how you could develop the local ownership and develop the green transition that is very important for all of us. This is a topic that has been very important for us in our organization and through all the rural areas in Denmark for quite some years. But of course, we see right now, not just because of the actual crisis, but also during the last few years, even more local communities and people getting involved in how to become a part of the green transition. I have. I hope this presentation will work. Just a second. I'll see if this is gonna work. Just a second. Yes, I think.
And meanwhile, Stefan is sharing his slides. I would like to remind you to post questions in the chat. We are very much looking forward to hear from you in the audience as well. Go ahead.
Well, can you see the slide that says locally ownership in transitions towards green energy systems? Is that?
I think if you put this on a show, can you do that? Now we are in slide 4, but if you move up to the first one, yes, and then you put it on the slideshow, then we're all set.
Okay, I hope I will say when I change page, and if it's not changing, I'll do it manual. Okay, well, I hope you can see slide number 2. In Denmark,
you have to move it. You have to move it. It's yes. We need to speed up.
Yes, you can see it.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I'll say briefly, as you can see in Denmark, we have the Danish government and all the national parliament has made up the criteria or commitment towards the Paris Agreement, and also on the reduction on the climate gases and the zero emission. In fact, during the last 20 years, or even more than 20 years, there have been about 10 or 15 municipalities that have been the front runners in the wind turbines, putting up new wind turbines, and the recent years also solar power parks. And the 10 or 15 municipalities has been very not just front runners, but has also been the front runners towards how we can find new solutions with local ownership, or at least some of the municipalities. And if you go 20 years back in time, the wind turbines were not that large as they are today. Of course, it was not 150 meters high wind turbines, or not in the near of that size, and it was also smaller investment projects. So in fact, if you go 20 or even 30 years back in time, it was wind turbine guilds, or a kind of cooperative that put up a lot of the wind turbines in Denmark. There was also legislation that was not that strict as we see it today, so it was quite another period of time. So at that time, it was more local-owned projects, local-owned wind turbines, people living in the area, and there were also some taxations legislation that made it interesting in investing and be a part of a solar cell cooperative, or guild, as it also known in Danish. While the wind turbines grew in size, there were also a lot of there was a time period where it was not profitable to put up new wind turbines. So we had a period of time that nothing happened until a new legislation, a new economic frameworks, frame conditions made it more interesting to put up wind turbines again. And that is about 10, 15 years, but more about 10 years ago. And at that time, the wind turbines had grown very big, and it was not longer locally owned guilds or cooperatives. It was investment companies that put up the wind turbines, and also we saw that it was not just owned by an investment company. It could be owned or shift ownership many times with companies, people living far away, and all the economic growth that it gave, and all and all the positive economic that was gained from the projects and from the wind turbines was going to the people, the owner that lived far away. So in that time period, we saw that the not in my backyard, NIMBY, as we call it in Denmark, kind of resistance grew, both of the size of the wind turbines, but also that nobody was close to the ownership of the wind turbines. Well, during that, we saw, and also our organization tried to work with new ways of reduce that local resistance. And there were work with some principles in local ownership, because when we talk to people, when we met with people, they clear and said that we want to be, if we should and if we shall see the wind turbines in our backyard, and if we have to be neighbored to the wind turbines, then we need also to gain from it. We need also to be respected, and the legislation made some criteria about the distance from the call it energy facility, because at that time it was most wind turbines, but it could also be other kinds of energy producing facility to neighbors. And in fact, today we have 4 times the height of the wind turbine. That is the nearest distance from the wind turbine to the nearest neighbor. In fact, this distance is much larger if you want to be sure that you can put up and wind turbine today, to be sure that the local municipality, that's the authority that has to give you the permit to put up a wind turbine. If you want that municipality and to say yes to the project, people need to be in, maybe not in favor, but accept, or at least mostly accept that the wind turbine is going to be put up. So the distance is in fact more than 4 times the height of the wind turbine. But also the process with the dialogue between the investors and the municipality and the community, the local community, but also the specific neighbors that are living in the closest range of the wind turbine. It has to be a good dialogue between these three parts or partners in a project. There has been some financial compensations to neighbors, and in the first part of the last decade, the financial compensation was mostly that you could own a small share of the total project. But we saw that that there were some mistakes in the legislation that made it not that interesting for people to own just a little bit of a big wind turbine, and that's why this was not functioning and this was not working. People were not buying into that. It was defined afterwards that the local ownership had some distances of both the issues of living in the nearby or in the surrounding of the wind turbine, and the nearest neighbors outside the 4 times wind turbines distance. They had the local ownership some one of their main goals and wishes, but also the local, you could say, community, and at the end also people living in the municipality. These 3 groups had interesting or interests in becoming owners. Not with the same kind of interests of being owners, but all 3 parts had interest in that. Today we have still the green compensation to the community, that is to the local community. That is not a compensation for one single person, that is for the local community, where the community benefits from it. So in fact, right now during the last couple of years, we haven't seen many new wind turbines raised, because that the green compensation had a 2-year period where the agreement about or behind the green compensation wasn't working, and also that we have seen many projects that was not with local ownership, where it was an investment company, and that kind of investment company ownership was not attractive to the neighbors and for the municipalities many places. So we haven't seen the great number of wind turbines raised through the last years. But to sum up how we see it right now, and I will also share some comments about solar parks at the end. This is an example, Nissum Breeding Wind Turbine Guild, a kind of cooperative that raised a 28 megawatts wind park just beside a community, a small town with less than 3,000 people living there. And the wind turbines are placed just outside in the water in the Nissum Breeding, where it's 50% local ownership, where people have bought shares, and the rest of the ownership is a local cooperative, a local energy company. They are right now also the same people behind that, putting up a new wind turbine with 9 megawatts. So you can see it's we're talking about 200 meters of wind turbine, where there's 75% locally ownership. I have also mentioned here Høvsøre Solar Power Park with 40 megawatts, and that is in fact right now out in the public where people can buy shares. It has a total amount about 210 million Danish crowns in investment, and 50% of the solar power park is for the local ownership, people in the surrounding of the solar power park, and also in the near communities, and in the end in the municipality of Lemvig. 50% is possible to people to buy in that area, and the other 50% is cooperatives, locally owned energy company that's gonna own that. What we see is the 3 examples have been raised without any local resistance. And that is in fact a very good picture of what the good process with the dialogue, where people have been brought in to discuss the project, how it's done, and also that you have the respect for the local people and the nearest neighbors that still gonna be living there. And on the other hand, that people can be a part of the ownership and not just buy when it has a low % of outcome, but you can have quite a good investment also as a local people or a local community. So this is what we see right now is going to be the new perspective on wind turbines, but also when we talk about the solar parks. I also have another example you see here. That's the climate park Nes Hede in Lemvig municipality. What you see is the gray area is 265 hectares of new solar panels. The green area, that is new forests, gonna be raised with 100 hectares of green or new forest. What you also can see in the upper part of the map is we have a very nature area that has been very challenged with what is it called? The water coming from the farmers' fields has been too much with in Danish we call it næringsstoffer. So they have made a reformation. They have cleaned up, in fact, a lake and in the north part of this area, and also this new climate park is gonna reduce what is coming from the fields, the næringsstoffer from the fields. So in fact, in the future, we will have not just better biodiversity and more forests and the solar panels, we will also see that the whole water system is going to be better. They have also other economic perspectives from the neighbors, for the neighbors. Also local ownership is one of them that is put into this project. 8 houses is going to be taken out because they would be totally in the middle of this solar park, and unfortunately the Danish legislation does not make it possible to move one or several houses from an area to another open area in the rural districts, in the rural areas. So that is one of the issues right now, is the legislators, is the government, is the national parliament gonna say yes, that we can replace houses from the surroundings of wind turbines, or in fact houses in the middle of solar parks, to other places, and relocation, that you can still have people, the same amount of people living in the community, and you can have the green transition with solar parks, as we see here, or with wind turbines. The government, despite all this, because of the rapidness, and we have to put up twice as much wind turbine capacity on land that we have today, and despite that we put up even more double what we have in the sea and in the oceans, with offshore wind turbines. Despite that development, we have to at least twice the number of megawatt produced on land, and the government has put up with a proposal that they would like to have pointed out big energy landscapes where you could put solar parks and wind turbines that has the size at least 1,000 hectares, preferable 2,000 hectares, where you can put up solar panels and also wind turbines at a scale that they are attractive also to be in the near of power to X technology. It's going to be put up.
Ask you to have the final words so that
Yep.
we can have some discussion.
Yeah. And the legislators and the national government, unfortunately, they do not want to continue the way with the municipality that is giving the permits, where it's the local government taking action and responsibility of the green transition and say yes to new projects. This is going to be driven with the national planning, without local ownership, without that the investment is going to give economic and money for new development in the areas that are going to be met with this kind of energy landscapes. So right now we fear, and that is my final comment, that we fear that the good development we have seen the last years is going to be totally stopped, and people are going to say, no, thank you, not in my backyard. Maybe we have done that for 2 or 3 years, but not anymore in my backyard. And the resistance towards the green transition will rise. So that is one of our key points towards the politicians in Denmark, and hopefully you will take that to your parliament as well. Do it with the local authorities, create the dialogue with the people in the community, the municipalities and the investors, and create some solutions, some projects that people can be a part of and gain economic growth with locally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stefan. And thank you all speakers for these, I think, inspiring talks. There's a lot to talk about. There are plural perspectives to this, and now we would like to invite all the speakers on the screen to have a short panel. And I would also like to introduce my colleague, Hilma Salonen, who has been monitoring questions on the chat. And I think actually, Stefan, your last words fit a bit well the concerns about that local influence maybe on the decrease to the first question that was posed to Irene Kummonen.
And Irene has actually even answered the question already in the chat. But yeah, if we have time, we have 2 other questions.
Yes.
So the first one is about mining permits, which are an essential question, especially in northern Sweden. And the person asking this question would like to know, how can rural areas with low market pressure and population decline deal with the uncertainties that are linked to industries such as mineral prospecting and mining?
This was a big one.
Yeah.
Who would like to take the ball here? Lisa, do you have some views on this?
I was thinking that I don't know personally much about mining because I'm from Denmark. But I would imagine that we all have to start by making sure that there is a proper dialogue with the locals, wherever the locals may be, because you can't just arrive and say, we need to change things right now. You have to prepare that change way in advance and find out what the issues are before you come with the solutions. Otherwise, it would be the wrong solutions or something the locals don't see as their problem. And so
there's more than planning that needs to be in place.
You have to make sure that the right questions
to
asked.
link it to influence and local meaningful discussions.
Yes.
Right. And then the second question is especially to Asidis Lök, but also others who might have a view, and it's about local or municipal planning. So which aspects of local and municipal planning do you see as most important for the clean energy transition in the transport, land and maritime transport sector?
Yeah, I think if I start by reacting to this question, I think there are two things that come to my mind primarily. One is the role of local planning with regard to drawing together local knowledge and expectations and ideas through participation and consultation with the local population. And the second one is has to do with the comprehensive nature of spatial planning, which is that you're never only looking at transport or agriculture or residential development or whatever. You're always looking at a particular area and thinking about the future prospects when you're looking at how these things work together. And the beautiful thing about planning for energy transition and green transition is that there are so many things that we can emphasize in planning and land use that give us combined benefits, that give us benefits with regard to CO2 emissions, public health, urban design, and so on and so forth. So I would say those are the things that we have to have our eye on in plan making.
Yes, and I think also it has been evident in some of the talks that mobilizing agency is important, but also with the larger scale of installations and projects, multifunctionality is an important issue. And I think it was a very interesting aspect that Johanna, you brought, that the motivation for local ownership is actually quite important here. You want to comment on that, Johanna?
Well, yes. I mean, I think maybe for a long time we haven't needed to think so much on an individual level about energy transition. We're kind of catered to, or kind of look to this bigger system to be in place. But I think, I mean, more and more in recent years, we've found more and more reasons to engage, and the last few months obviously have been very much pushing for this motivation. So we have these different people who are kind of forerunners, who are looking, liking the technology and interested in development on all of these things. But most people are not so interested in energy in that sense. It's just something that should be there. But now it's becoming clear that it's sort of on the agenda. But even with that, I think most people won't engage with it in let's say, technical way. It's more kind of, okay, so I have this need to lower my energy prices, and then I have to engage somehow, perhaps, or I can engage with someone who is engaging. And I think in relation to the energy transition, it's important that we start recognize these different motivations, and also, I mean, it's something that can be used if we want to have an energy transition, to work with different groups with different motivations, and find the way to kind of connect with them and how to involve them in the right sense. I mean, for some, it's just that I want to do something with my community at this moment. They're doing something about energy. All right, I'll do that, but it's not necessarily energy that I'm interested in. So that would be the comment.
And we are running short of time, so I would love to have continued the discussion, but I have to invite Lisa Nielsen to make a wrap-up and commentary of all these interesting plural perspectives that we've heard today. What is your take on it?
Very interesting so far. I have a few points. One thing is that the locals, the farmers, the local owners have to be prepared to change old laws. Biogas, for instance, we have a law in Denmark where how many farm animals can you have compared to how much biogas you produce and the size of your land. Maybe that has to change. And this is where people will be upset, but it might be good to change. Actually, Denmark produces 25% of our natural gas need directly from biomass. Maybe we can do more. The other one is CO2 is actually a limited resource, which will blow most people's minds. The point is, it's not available as a single source, point of source. It's available in the air, which is a bad thing. But have it available for creating biofuels, not so many places where you have a point source of CO2. So if you have a biogas plant, you also have a point source. And some things have to change. New technologies will disrupt our thinking. People need to know more. We can no longer just say, I just push a button and I use energy. We really have to make sure that people know a little bit more than that. And that is how you get involved locally. And then I had a thinking that maybe we are changing from trying to provide energy, trying to provide security of supply, and actually what we are going to have to provide is a participatory energy supply and an energy security, participatory energy security, where we are all going to engage where we are. We can't just be consumers and be happy with that.
And I think these were excellent last words. I will conclude here and tell you a little bit more about the next steps. As I told you in the beginning, this is a starting discussion. We've not reached any bottom line here or definitive conclusions on local benefits from value creation for the rural areas, but we will continue with workshops like this this year, and our next step is that we see your input as being extremely important in building a base for the next step in the project, which is to look into more place-specific cases, regional specific cases. And we know that several issues, stakeholders, energy questions have not been discussed yet, so there's more to come. And I look forward to meet you hopefully again. And thank you for now.